So we're in the middle of July. What's the craziest thing that's happened to you this month? From desert drives to fake police officers. Without further ado, let's grab a blanket, turn off your lights for true scary July horror stories. We got 7 of them, guys.
Desert Drive. I never thought to share this story here, but a few months ago, I posted about it briefly in another subreddit, and everyone suggested I should share it here also. Some of you may have seen it the last time I shared it. It was summer, I believe the day after the 4th of July, and my husband and I were in the middle of a cross-country road trip. We were driving through Texas, and for any of you who have driven across the entire state of Texas, you know that is very long and very barren. Sometimes we go for hours without seeing anything at all, and the towns we did pass through didn't consist of much more than rusty old gas stations and a few dusty little houses. Looking out the window, you would swear you were just driving through the same 5 miles of desert again and again and again. I had started getting a headache, and my husband suggested I take a quick nap to get rid of it. I remember allowing myself to doze off as I watched the beautiful colors of a desert sunset. The slowing of the car woke me up, and the first thing I noticed was how dark it was. I believe it was around 10 p.m. My husband had stopped at a gas station with a small shop. He told me he was going to grab us some food and asked if I needed to pee. Knowing I might not have another chance for quite a while, I went into the shop to use the restroom. Both the men's and women's restroom were a little down the hall from the open area of the shop. I was groggy at the time and tired, and realized how badly I needed to pee, so I shuffled into the restroom. As I made my way the short distance from the door to the nearest of the 2 stalls, I made eye contact with a woman coming out of the only other stall. She didn't look quite homeless, but she was definitely messy looking. She had wild gray hair, almost shoulder length if it hadn't been sticking out every direction from her head. It looked like she hadn't seen a brush in weeks. She was wearing ragged looking clothing, a pair of ill-fitting black workout shorts, and I remember noting her foam flip-flops. Several layers on top, one of them being a large purple and green coat. Keep in mind that this is Texas in July. The jacket was just hanging on her shoulders crooked, like she hadn't bothered to take a few more seconds to put it on correctly. She was carrying something in a tied-up plastic grocery bag. I gave a quick smile as our eyes met, and she just stared at me in return. Then her face turned wild and intense looking. Her eyebrows were set as if she was angry, but her eyes had a wild, alive look. She looked at me like she was hungry, and this was when I felt the first tinge of something wrong. I tried to brush it off. She waddled over to the only sink, and I took my time shutting the stall door because something about her posture in front of the mirror struck me as odd, and I was trying to figure it out. She was standing with her body more angled towards me, but her face was turned to the mirror. Her body was tensed, legs slightly crouched, as if she was ready to act. Her eyes were not up by her face or trying to fix her mess of hair or being washed. They were at her side elbows, also slightly bent. I wasn't sure why, but I suddenly felt uncomfortable. I regretted leaving my purse and cell phone behind. I shut and locked the stall door and took my time using the toilet. I wanted her gone before I left the safety of the stall. I stayed there long after I had finished, but the woman was still there, so I waited longer. Finally, I heard the smacking of her flip-flops as she made her way to the door. I heard it open and then slam closed. The door was pretty heavy and had slammed the same way when I had entered. I stayed for a moment and allowed the wave of relief to wash over me before I reached for the lock, then paused. Fingers only an inch from the lock, I stayed as silent as I could manage to confirm what I had just thought I heard. Yes, breathing. The woman had only pretended to leave. At this point, I was scared and confused. Why had she tried to trick me into thinking she left, only to stick around and be as quiet as possible? I knew something was very wrong, so I stayed in the stall even longer, and this time, it must have been at least 20 minutes, but I had no way of knowing for sure. I could tell from the direction her breathing was coming from that she had positioned herself in the far corner, right next to the door, but far enough that I couldn't see her feet. Finally, I heard her leave. This time, I waited a few minutes to make sure she hadn't tried her trick again. I slipped out of the stall, quickly washed my hands, and rushed down the hallway to the store. It was pitch black outside, and I had no idea where she was. She couldn't be far. A large man was checking out at the register, so I waited near a window display until he left the store and quietly slipped out the door behind him. Sure enough, crouched right outside the front door is the woman. She seemed surprised as she stood and turned away, walking quickly around the side of the store. My husband was waiting in the car and asked me if I was okay since I had taken so much longer than usual, and I said I would tell him all about it once we were away from that store. The Redditors that previously read about my experience had many theories, but the two most common were that she was a druggie and wanted to mug me, or that she worked with sex trafficking. I'm open to any of your theories. I tried to see if there was anything in the news from around that time, but I couldn't figure out exactly where we were when this happened. He just wanted a glass of water. This is not a long story, but to this day, I feel lucky that we weren't hurt by this man. I was about 13 years old at the time, and I was living with my parents and two little sisters in the suburbs. A man knocked on our door and claimed he was selling vacuums. My mom told him we weren't interested at the moment but thanked him. He said that it was very hot outside, and if we could get him a drink of water, he would appreciate it. My mom looked hesitant, but being the good soul she is, and it being a sweltering day in July, she let him inside and went to the kitchen to get him a glass of ice water. While he was waiting in the foyer with me and my sisters, I noticed he was getting very shifty and nervous. I started to get a bad feeling for some reason. I watched as he was looking around, fidgeting, and trying to make small talk with us. My mom comes back with the water, he gulped it down, thanked her for the drink, and went on his way. Turns out, he wasn't an actual salesman, and he attempted to sexually assault a couple women in her neighborhood, backing them into a corner when they let him in the house, grabbing one of them inappropriately, etc. He was apprehended by the police eventually, and I'm assuming he went to jail. I know it's not as creepy as some of the other stories on here, but I still wonder, what if we weren't with my mom at the time? Would he have decided to do something to her? My dad was in the house at the time, so I guess he decided not to target us. We're all lucky that he didn't do something much worse, like he was apparently planning. I now know to always trust your instincts and never let someone in the house if you do not know them. Close call with a fake police officer. I think I should start with just a little bit of background information. I'm a 17-year-old guy from the United Kingdom, Scotland, and in my area, it is not uncommon to have the odd junkie roaming around, kinda like stray dogs. Don't worry, this all shall become relevant soon enough. Anyways, on with the story. It was a lovely July day last year, and I just finished my chores for the day and was stoked to get outside. I finished up cleaning and headed out. My female friend, we'll call her Levy, had met me just outside my front garden as she lived close to me and aided me in my walk. Now I should mention I was smoking a cigarette-sized blunt at this point, and I was almost done. We literally were about a couple of 100 yards from my house, but couldn't see my house because the path was a twisted one, with houses at each side sheltering it, when an older-looking man, about mid-30s, dressed in a normal jogging suit with a backpack and a waterproof jacket over it all, approached us. We had just come around a bend. It was almost as if he was waiting there. My female friend was to the right of me, may I add. This was the first thing that set alarm bells off in my head, but no big deal. I assumed that it was just a junkie asking us about cigarettes. But before I could even react to seeing this man almost appear out of nowhere, he starts talking into the lapel of his jacket, rhyming off codes and numbers like they were common practice. The man stated that he was a police officer, that he was under suspicion I had marijuana on my person. In my country, we have CID, which are basically undercover police officers who wear civilian clothing to catch people off guard. So, me, being the trusting person I am, asked the officer what the problem was. By this point, I could clearly tell that this man was giving Levy the creeps, but she stuck close to me. What happens next still baffles me to this day, but also fills me with such relief, because I can assure you things could have been much worse. The officer then proceeded to do the usual, stand against the fence, legs apart, arms in the opposite direction routine while he searched me. The search set off extreme alarm bells, as it wasn't very careful, very delicate police standard. This search was rushed and hastened and sloppy, and made me feel quite violated. I knew after this that we needed to get out. The man was acting visibly agitated when his frisk turned out fuck all for the drugs that he was claiming I had. Out of the blue, things take a turn for the worst. The man starts asking peculiar questions. He asked me heavily about drugs, if I have any, etc. He then asked me to empty my pockets. He searched my tobacco, and then he took my phone. By this point, the man was pushing me around and asking repeatedly, and with agitation growing in every recital of his question, "Where are you hiding your drugs?" I seriously had nothing on me, and this man clearly wanted something that I didn't have, and I knew if I didn't do something, he would act out, or I assumed. He looked at my phone, then up at me. His eyes were crystal blue like ice. In this short ordeal, I had never made eye contact with this guy, but as my gaze met his, I knew that this man wasn't fucking around. He chilled my blood as a stare bored right into me. He asked if he would find drug dealers on my phone, which I can tell you right now, a police officer would not ask. I kept refuting, and then just as quickly as the ordeal started, it was over. My aggression had turned to panic, as if a switch had been flipped. The man pushed me away frantically with my friend. He shouted, "Fuck off, run away now, get out of here." Obviously, we legged it out and didn't look back. Something I should mention. The man did not address my female friend the whole time. She stood in complete shock through this whole thing. Chuckling Creepsman. Hey Reddit, longtime lurker, new poster. For some brief background, I'm an 18-year-old male, and this encounter occurred when I was around 13 years old. Every year, when the 4th of July rolls around, me and my family would go to a friend's house to celebrate. The friend and his family are quite wealthy, and they live in a large house about half a mile into the woods. The 4th of July parties at their house were always huge events, with around 15 to 20 families attending. The younger people at the parties were either around my age or high school age. I typically hung out with my friend Gavin and his sister Trina, who I had a huge crush on at the time, who were the kids of the family friend that owned the house. On this particular 4th of July, the older kids decided they wanted to go out into the woods, and of course, all of the younger kids wanted to go too, me included. Keith, one of the older kids, agreed to us tagging along under the condition that we wouldn't chicken out and run away. All the younger kids agreed, and the whole group journeyed into the woods. Keith was leading us down a trail to a nearby pond when Trina grabbed my hand. 13-year-old me turned beet red in the darkness, but I could tell something was wrong. "There's someone in the woods. I just saw him. He's a big man." She pointed out into the trees, but I didn't see anything. I squeezed her hand tightly and told her that she was just seeing things. Trina had always been the sort to scare easily, and I thought nothing of it. The group finally made it to the pond. We only had one flashlight with us, but by this time, everyone's eyes had adjusted to the blackness of the woods. We all sat around talking and goofing off. We occasionally heard sounds out in the woods, but we just figured it was the local deer population. Most of us are children of deer hunters, and the area was near our dad's hunting land. Eventually, everyone settled down, and Keith started telling us a scary story. It was something about kids getting lost in the woods. As the story continued, Tina's grip on my hand got tighter and tighter. She was practically shaking when one of Keith's friends tossed a log into the pond right at the story's climax. Everyone jumped and screamed, and eventually, we all started laughing at how scared we got. Suddenly, another distinct laugh joined ours. It was a deep, throaty chuckle that echoed off the empty space around the pond. We all stopped laughing and sat in silence. I looked around, and my eyes locked onto a large black mass that could only be humans standing at the edge of the woods around the pond. "That was a good one. You even startled me," said the mass. The voice sounded similar to the chuckle from before. The air seemed to freeze. For what seemed like eternity, no one moved. It felt like Trina was trying to shatter the bones in my hand. Suddenly, as if time had started again, we all scrambled up and ran. We ran as fast and as hard as we could, but it didn't seem fast enough. I could hear the heavy footfalls behind our group, heavier than any one of us could produce. The man was following us. After what seemed like hours, we all exited the woods and ran into the brightly lit driveway. We watched the edge of the woods while Keith did a head count. Trina swears to this day that she saw the man standing at the edge of the woods watching us before turning back and walking away. This remains one of the scariest experiences in my life. I like to tell myself that the man was just passing by and had no ill intentions, but why did he chase after us? If he was the one who Trina saw on the way to the pond, why did he follow us there? I'll never know his intentions or why he was there. So, Chuckling Creepsman, let's not meet again. Anyone know how to get out of a lease? I'm a woman in her early 20s who lives alone in a shitty apartment in a shitty neighborhood in a small college town. I know now that this was a horrible mistake and wish I could get out of my lease because I would move the fuck out instantly. I didn't realize how bad it was when I first visited the complex. It was a sunny day in February. Kids were out playing, people were walking their dogs. The building was motel style, a little rundown looking, but the rent was cheap and it was close to my work. Fast forward past several months of ordinary ass apartment living, I start noticing a working class looking middle-aged white man who definitely doesn't live there hang around at all hours. He drove a fairly plain but older looking black Mercury Sable sedan, and he always friggin' tried to talk to me. Never anything rude or anything, but he would just come out of nowhere and try to make friendly small talk, as though he was just one of the neighbors. He overheard one of my neighbors calling me by my name, and started also doing this as if he knew me. That's when I started to get really creeped out by this man. Around mid-April, after he had approached me around 10 p.m., I flashed a can of mace at him, and I told him to fuck off. He put his hands up and looked surprised, backing away slowly. I instantly had a weird feeling that I had just made a mistake, so I apologized and carefully went upstairs to my apartment. He watched me the whole time, but I chalked it up to him being freaked out by the fact that I just threatened him. I didn't see him again for a while after that, and that made me second guess him. Was this guy really a creep? Had I thwarted a creep? About 3 weeks later, I hear a knock on my door around 7 p.m., just moments after I had come home from work. I didn't think anything of it. Probably a lost guest. That's when I hear my name through the door. followed by, "It's management, open up. The ceiling is leaking downstairs, and I need to check your plumbing." It's that man. I don't say anything. I turn off the lights. Thank God I live on the 3rd floor, so I don't have accessible windows, and I call the cops. They come over, make a huge to-do with light sirens, the whole bit. They come back saying they can't find the man or his car. Well, no kidding, buddy. Y'all didn't exactly sneak up on him. I didn't hear or see that man again, but according to the friendly neighbor, the only person in the building I really knew, a lot of people had seen him around, and a lot of people found him creepy. He had pulled similar shit on a woman on the 1st floor, calling her name and following her to her apartment. She called the leasing office, who called the police, and they escorted him off the premises and bared him from the property. So we figured that would at least deter him. Fast forward a few weeks later to July. I was out of town for the weekend of the 4th when I got a call from management saying they had to come perform a safety check on me because of a concern from a neighbor and found that my apartment had been broken into. I assured them I was fine, requested that they make sure to secure the place, and told them I would be home on Sunday to assess things. I chalked the whole safety thing up to someone having probably just seen the burglar. I ended up coming back to a really bizarre situation. The place had been ransacked, but nothing was missing, except for the contents of my desk drawer with my stuff for my taxes, a copy of my lease, and other similar paperwork, and a picture of me and my mom off the refrigerator. A few weeks later, I ran into the friendly neighbor again, and he really expressed surprise to see me, casually asking if I heard what happened. Well, duh. I heard what happened. It was my apartment that got broken into. After some confusion, and quickly realizing we were talking about 2 entirely different things, I explained what happened to my apartment. He had no idea that it happened, but he suddenly looked like he was about to shit himself before beginning to speak. His tone obviously one of sudden distress. Apparently, on the 5th of July around midnight, some woman was running around the complex screaming and banging on doors for help because an old white man in a black sedan was stalking her. Nobody opened their door because it was a shitty neighborhood, but somebody called the cops. When they got there, they found a part of a weave on the sidewalk next to the parking lot, but nobody could find the woman or the man or his car. By that point, everybody knew about him and suspected him. Some nosy person trying to help the police found a picture in the parking lot. Friendly neighbor said he saw it himself, that it was a picture of me with a middle-aged woman. That's why they called management. That's why they requested a safety check on me. I too suddenly felt like I was about to shit myself, and have felt ridiculously uncomfortable in my apartment and around my complex ever since. I feel like I'm being watched, stalked, followed. All this stuff that's happened is just too bizarre to be a coincidence. I can barely stand to leave my bedroom. I've been too afraid to even take my trash out. So, creepy guy who's clearly been stalking me probably broke into my apartment, likely now has all my personal information, and allegedly kidnapped a woman. Let's not meet again. Home Alone. Wait! What's that noise? So, this is my first personal experience post on Reddit, ever. So I'll try to make it as entertaining to you readers as possible. This experience happened this summer on July of 2015. To give some backstory, I live in a small town in California, just 20 miles from the coast. And it is considered one of the safest and friendliest towns in the state. Crime is usually rare, besides the usual teen caught smoking weed or drinking alcohol. But what I experienced that night was an experience that I will never forget. I'm a 17-year-old male, recently graduated high school, and soon going into college. Because it is summer, I finally have the rare chance and freedom to do whatever I want all day without worrying about schoolwork, and I also have the freedom to stay up all night if I wanted to. Anyways, One day, my parents told me that they were going to leave the house in the morning and not come back until the next day, meaning I had the house all to myself all day and all night. My mom was getting surgery and was staying overnight, and my dad decided to stay with her in the hospital. I was pretty excited that I had the house to myself for 24 hours, because I never did before. But what happened made me wish my parents were there. As usual, all I did was watch TV, play video games, and be unproductive all day. Basically my summer experience. When night rolled around, I was still playing Xbox until around 11 p.m. when things got weird. Now, to give you a few more backgrounds, my family has 2 indoor cats. Both are extremely friendly Maine Coon cats, until something happens outside. Whenever there is a bird, raccoon, person, etc., they get excited, and their feline instincts kick in, and they immediately rush to the window and start meowing and growling. They growl especially if someone is at the door. All this information will be relevant for later. So, back to the story. It was close to 11 at night, when I was still on my ass playing Call of Duty. The noise volume was fairly low, so suddenly, I heard a few taps coming from the general front door area, like light footsteps and small scrapes. My cat suddenly bolted from another room into the house. I paused the game and looked over, and saw my cats were walking around excitedly with their tails pointed up and their ears perched. Although my hair stood up as well, I simply dismissed the noise as a rat or a raccoon, either on the front yard or on the roof, because we have so many, and I hear them all the time, especially at night. Also, I was too engaged in my game to know where specifically the sounds came from, so I just assumed the roof. A few seconds later, I returned to my game, although my cats were still clearly nervous and excited. I almost forgot about the sounds a few minutes later when I heard it again, this time louder, now sounding more like something hard shuffling across our stone-paved front yard from the front door area. My cats quickly sprinted to the windows that overlooks the yard and started to meow excitedly and occasionally hiss. This time, I knew something was definitely there. I paused my game again and went over to the window where my cats were at to see what was out there. I expected a deer or a coyote, since rats cannot make that type of sound, but the noise only came from outside the door, not the roof. I peered out, but saw nothing, since it was very dark. Coming back to the television, I was a bit more creeped out. I decided I didn't want to play any more Xbox, since my hairs were standing up and shivers were spreading throughout my body. Besides, I've already played enough today. Being 6'4" and weighing 200 pounds, I felt like a dumbass and a pussy for being afraid of a deer. I decided I would brush my teeth and go to bed before I went into the bathroom, when I was just standing there thinking all of this. Crazy shit happened. My cats heard it before me. Both of them ran to the front door, one of them growling like I never heard it before. A split second later, I heard it. Heavy shuffling footsteps right outside the door. And then, another split second, the automatic lighting for the front porch turned on. Now this time, I knew it was a person for sure. Only a human can make obvious footsteps like that. And the automatic lighting only turns on for big objects, like people. There was no knock or doorbell ring. But the front door is loose on its hinges, and if you slightly push it or nudge it, the door rattles. That is exactly what happened, and that rattle terrified me to the bone. Just knowing that I was home alone, in the dark except my TV screen, with footsteps and the automatic light turning on outside, gives me a feeling of terror that I will never forget. My cats were absolutely going crazy at this point, meowing, hissing, growling like crazy. Although every single muscle in my body told me to get away, curiosity that people get to look at terror and wonder got the better of me, and I quietly snuck to the door. If you enter my house, you would enter the mudroom, which is just a closet and a place to put shoes, and then would have to turn right to a former doorway without a door to enter the living room where I was. Also, my door is not a fully wooden door like most people have, but instead have decorative glass in the place where the panels should be. Anyways, I snuck up to the mudroom and peered around the empty doorway to indeed see through the glass a figure of a person standing there. I cleared my throat and mustered up the courage to ask, "Who's this?" No answer. Now I asked, "Who are you?" The figure bent down and cupped his hands to his face and peered through the decorative glass. The terror swept me again, with my throat tightening and shivers spreading across my body. Because I was in such shock, I hardly remember the facial features of the person, except it was a thin-faced African-American guy. We stared at each other for a few seconds, and his expression turned into a scowl, like disappointment that I was home, and in a second, this guy was gone. I could hear the fast-paced footsteps of shoes against stone as this guy ran off. About 15 seconds later, I heard a vehicle turn on and a screech of tires as he drove off. My terror turned into warm, sweet relief as I knew this guy was gone. My cats finally stopped acting so crazy, and just like two cute little kittens forgot about it, walked to whatever corner of the house, lied down, and started snoozing like nothing ever happened. I called my dad immediately, and when it was ringing, I thought of what I should tell him. When he picked up, I hesitated on telling him what just happened. I don't know why. Maybe it was because I didn't want him to make a big deal out of the whole thing, or I didn't want him to deal with a house burglar and the police while still having to deal with my mom just waking up from surgery and in pain. So I didn't tell him. I never told him or my mom what I experienced that night. I didn't want my parents to worry, especially because they were more on the overprotective side. My theory of who this guy was and what he was doing is that he was scouting the neighborhood and looking for empty driveways so that he could somehow break into a house and steal whatever he could find. Since our car was gone and I was home alone, he probably thought that there was nobody home. I'm guessing the shuffling and light footsteps the first 2 times when I thought it was a rat or a deer was him hesitating or something like that, and on 3rd time, he found the courage to look through our glass panel. Finally, when he heard me, he became curious and looked through the glass. However, when he saw me, he figured that he couldn't rob the place because I was there, so he bolted and drove away. Again, this is just my theory. I really have no idea what this guy was up to. The important thing is that I've never seen or heard of this guy again, and I'm relieved that he hopefully will never visit our house again. Actually, now that I think about it, I wish he would come back, and I'll be waiting with a baseball bat to show him who the fuck he's messing with. I'm so angry at myself that I reacted in such fear and terror. I promise that I would react differently if that would happen again. In conclusion, let's not meet, or maybe we could meet again. Nightmare experience at my friend's cabin. My story involves myself and 3 of my really good friends throughout my whole childhood. We'll have them go by Kevin, Ryan, and Tommy, who I am good friends with to this day. I could not write this story to you without their consent, help, and experiences as well. The story you're about to read is true and is not made up in any way. Regardless whether we had seen things or not, the reality is that we had experienced something very horrifying the one night at my friend Kevin's cabin. We had thought long and hard about actually sharing it or not, afraid of being ridiculed, but we are ready to share with the community, and again, you had to be there to experience it. One of my friends had actually suffered a nervous breakdown after the incident and needed counseling in itself. Regardless, I would like you to know also I've been a skeptic on the paranormal and find it very hard to believe in many aspects, but I love to watch, listen, and read it simply because I always have to have an open mind in life. An open mind, in my opinion, is a growing one. Whether it was paranormal or not, someone was clearly there that night. Now, finally on with the story. During the midsummer, usually around the middle of July, me and a couple of my good friends who I had mentioned, all the way through my childhood, always made time to go to one of my friends' family cabins way up north in the forests of Minnesota. Throughout all of our young years, we would always go, for sure accompanied by my friend's dad, and sometimes a few of our dads as well. Once we were juniors in high school, we felt mature and old enough to go to the cabin on our own finally, without Kevin's dad or any other adult supervision that may have had accompanied us. I would like to mention a little information in regards to my friend's cabin to help you picture the scenario. My friend's cabin is very remote and is very little based upon a very large-sized island. Other cabins were on the island, but the next one closest to us was a solid quarter or half-mile away at least, which is my best guess, which you could get to by taking a man-made path around the island. And I want to mention that to get to my friend's cabin, you had to park on a gravel road on the opposite side of the island, as his cabin was on an island, and take his boat across the lake about a half-mile to reach the cabin. This lake is huge. My mind always had a tendency to run around when sleeping there at night throughout all my years, for it was all one level with only 2 bedrooms next to one another, a kitchen living room area connected, and a bathroom in the back of the cabin. And where you slept in the cabin was there always at least one window in each room with no curtain to it at all, so it was very easy to see outside to the woods and the lake. And this is where my mind would run, as I always thought someone was peering in. Of course, nobody ever was. I had been in this cabin a dozen times throughout my lifespan, and nothing had ever happened. And the older I got, the easier it was to sleep. Now for the event. We would usually stay a week's worth for 4 to 5 nights. On the 3rd night during the trip, when we were there on our own finally, we had set up a campfire and had been drinking beer all night. We went out to his dock and gazed up at the magnificence of the stars and enjoyed our buzz, when all of a sudden, we heard something out of the water that sounded like a fish jumping out to catch a bug. We quickly looked out at the lake with curiosity, wondering where the splash came from, having our poles ready 24/7. Thankfully, the moon was out that night, which helps light up the lake. Otherwise, it would be dark as black, with there being no city lights for miles upon miles, and we would not have been able to see anything on the lake. My one friend Ryan began to point out, saying, what the hell is that?" After looking closely and finally spotting what he was pointing at, all I can describe is it was simply looked like a head out in the middle of the lake, just floating about, staring at us directly. It was about 3/4 worth of a football field length out in the lake from the dock. There's no question that I could see its features. It had long black hair and very palish skin like a face, but couldn't make out the eyes, mouth, nose, or the chin, as if it was just a blob of pale skin with long black hair over it. I'll never forget the feeling that came over me. The hairs on my legs, neck, arms all stood up, and I was paralyzed on the inside, ready to leave that moment. But we told ourselves that it was just a loon, as these birds are very popular night drifters on the lake and do their hunting late at night, and also have black with white colors on their coats and hunt by diving deep into the water, holding their breath up to minutes sometimes. So it was possible that a loon all of a sudden popped up in the water after hunting a bit, or at least we tried to talk ourselves into that scenario. All of us having the creeps and noticing it wasn't moving one bit, just treading water in its same place, went back to our campfire, lit it even brighter, and headed inside to drink some more. We soon forgot about the head with the help of the beer, until I had to use the bathroom really bad, and the one inside was preoccupied. I just went outside to do my business, since we were in the great outdoors. When I had been taking a pee and glancing out at the beautiful moonlit lake, I noticed that the black circle object was still there, but about 30 yards closer now, still looking as if it was staring right at me. I could easily see the nose on this thing's face. Again, it was very pale, like it hadn't seen the sun for years. A very, very uneasy feeling came over me, and I immediately went inside, told my other friends to come look, quick, keeping my eyes glued to it at the door to the cabin. We came outside to see it was still there, looking at us, as if this head was corked up at us with its chin in the air. Nobody dared to go down to the dock anymore, and we immediately went back inside, ruling out that it probably wasn't a loon because a loon wouldn't have tread the water in the same spot. Eventually, the current would have drifted it somewhere else in a rocking manner. For a loon to stay in the same spot for almost an hour or two made no sense to any of us. This head-like object was stiff as a board and not moving a single muscle, just staring up at us from the deck instead. There was no ripple effect at all in the lake from the object. We said it was just a log and went back inside. I could tell everyone felt uneasy too. A few hours would pass. It was super late into the night at this point, and we knew we needed to sleep. Being my curious self, though, I looked back outside once more, and the black object had completely vanished. I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief, thinking the log must have floated off, or just hit shore somewhere. As we slept with the windows open that night, since there was no AC in this cabin and we had to open them, or we would fry in his cabin, with it being in the middle of summer, me and my other buddy Tommy slept in the living room, while my two other friends slept in the two separate bedrooms with their doors open. Not being able to sleep, but keeping my eyes peeled shut, I began to hear someone walking around at the bottom of the stairs to the cabin. I thought I was about to shit bricks. No question what or whoever I heard down there was of Doc now, pacing back and forth as it made the sound of a boot clicking on the wood. It was as if they weren't sure what to do with themselves. It lasted for about 3 minutes. Wanting to whisper to my buddy, but frozen in fear, I just kept my eyes shut and ears on full alert. The footsteps sounded like they took 2 steps up the deck stairs all of a sudden, but then turned around, and sounded like they were sprinting out down the man-made path. After it sounded like the steps were long gone, and a couple minutes had passed, I woke up Tommy, asking if he heard the steps. Both of us sitting up, I was startled to my friend Ryan walking out of his room and saying we need to leave a minute after these steps vanished. Something was very disturbing about his expression, and I asked him why. He woke up to my other friend Kevin in the other room and said, "Let's go, get to the boat, it's time to go." Asking him, what, Ryan, what the hell is wrong with you? He explained to us quickly while grabbing his stuff, and I will never forget what he explained as he told us. He said when he was turning sides on his bed to get more comfortable, he saw someone peeking in at the top right corner of his window, and it quickly shifted out of his view. He said all he saw was one eye, ghostly white skin and black hair long down the window. Another thing I would like to add, when we look back at what he experienced, it chills us to the bone that since his face was in the top right corner of the window in my friend's room that he was sleeping in, this thing either was damn near 8 feet tall, standing on something like bricks trying to peek in, or was floating. Ryan then continued to say, "Let's fucking go," very seriously, absolutely disturbed the fuck out of my mind and feeling like I was gonna be sick, and then telling them what my friend and I heard in the living room. We all agreed to pack our stuff and book it. We locked up, and as we headed down the stairs, we saw bare footprints in the dirt heading off into the path, and all around the cabin. We picked up our stuff, getting to the boat, not knowing what was watching us or around us, threw our stuff on the boat and tied it, and sped off. I didn't even think about the head in the water anymore, or look in the water, thank God. My eyes were just glued to the island, trying to spot anything moving, but I saw nothing. When we had finally gotten our stuff packed in the car and the boat tied up, we hopped in the car and took off. We'd been driving out about 10 miles, and out of the blue, Ryan, who said he saw the person outside his window, all of a sudden broke down in the car, sobbing, saying, "What was it, guys? Oh, what did I see?" We called to tell our parents what had just happened on the way back, and that Ryan was freaking out, and they told us to get home safely and quickly. It was late, about 4 or 5 in the morning, but no one slept, and it was a very quiet ride home. My friend's dad, who owns the cabin, went up that following weekend and said he experienced nothing while there, but did mention bare footprints were still lingering about, which he thought odd, because someone was walking around his property, which bugged him badly. Whatever my friend saw in the window hit him really hard, After his breakdown, he had trouble sleeping multiple nights and ended up having to seek some help for a couple weeks and hop on some sleeping medicine. As time went on, he ended up being fine, but still feel uncomfortable sleeping next to a window without a curtain. I, to this day, cannot explain what happened and why it seemed to happen to us, and cannot explain what I saw in the lake and what Ryan specifically saw that night. Nothing has ever happened at that cabin since that night, so we're told from my friend's dad who owns it, which I believe him. I personally never had decided to go back to the cabin, which makes me really sad because I had great childhood memories there. Tommy and Kevin both have gone back and been fine, but Ryan refuses to go back and I'm with him. A lot of people have cabins on this island, so it could have been a prank in the makings that had been busted when Ryan saw the person at the window, or the person possibly wanted to do something worse. I'll never be able to explain what was floating in the lake, but the fact that this incident, along with bare feet and someone looking in at Ryan that night, all happened in the same night, seems like more than a coincidence.